What's up, guys? Today, this week, we're going to actually walk the walk and show you guys results that we've actually gotten in the previous time periods or before, or blah, blah, blah. So in this case, it's a case study for home service businesses. There's like 14 location in this case in southern part, southeastern part, somewhere around there, parts of the United States. They're kind of spread out anyways, but this is like comparing a 10-week to a 10-week period after versus me taking over, us taking over versus before. So to show like very preliminary top of whatever numbers we got, I had the massive numbers on the right. We got revenue up 19.7%. The cost per qualified lead, which is a lead that was actually bookable and not an actual just a 30-second phone call, a lead that was marked that this was a qualified lead, down 30%. And we got the ROI down. Actually, the ROI, not down, ROI to like 4.74 in the home services space on Google Ads, which is really good. Not LSA. This is Google Ads, and it's not brand, by the way. I want to emphasize on that. Oh, yeah, and we spent less on ads, 3.2% less ad spent. Would you look at that, Colby? Great, right?
Wow, that's amazing because, people are saying, what can you do for me?
What can you do for me? I can spend less money and make you more. Anyways, to go into this, just the kind of breakdown of what we're going to go after in this whole presentation. We're going to talk about what was going on in Google Ads, what we were seeing in the P&Ls. P&Ls are profit and loss sheets, basically the backend numbers, which is one of the most important things because you got to be looking at backend numbers. The system we kind of used for all 14 locations, because if that's a lot of accounts and it needed to be systemized to work across everything. Obviously, there's going to be a little structural or KPI adjustments here and there because of the different markets, but that's usually it needed to be fixed so that it could work across the board and it was easy to manage. Then 10 weeks before, 10 weeks after, and the framework for the multi-location. I don't even know what that is, but I guess we'll see. Okay, so 14 locations, one brand, 14 different realities. The thing about home services businesses is that they're always different from location. Like Colby is living in a different part of Canada. I'm living in a different part of Canada. So the markets are different. The issue with this scenario was that leads inside of Google Ads weren't properly defined versus what the team, like the franchisors, were defining as a lead. So Google Ads was saying I had 100 leads kind of situation, and the client was saying that, no, we got like 20-ish good leads out of this. So they were optimizing towards the wrong page. So Google was lying. Everybody was blaming the ads. These guys weren't
like the most common problem in lead gen. It's just like, oh yeah, well, Google says there's this many things, and then it's all about the validity. You have to give a signal and define what actually is good, get everyone in agreement, and then you go. That's how you should start too when you're starting with anyone, whether it's your own business or
your signals. So just to kind of, I guess, point out the problem, we kind of just talked about it. Like, there's no shared definition of a lead, or like the team that was managing it before didn't know how to define a lead or how to measure lead. They were going off like very basic. My call was 30-second long or kind of thing. It wasn't like a set in stone. So Google was treated as a source of truth by the agency, but the team on the back end wasn't. So there was no one shared source of truth that everybody was looking at. That's always an issue with lead gen businesses, because people like to look at dashboards, and then the business owners like to look at their KPIs. And Colby can speak to this and all the stuff we talk about. There's no clean attribution across the two, so it becomes really, really messy if you don't define things properly, right? So then,
I was just gonna say too, like the core of any business, if you are doing a good job, and this is where it gets difficult, because generally speaking, if you're doing a good job in your advertising, forget about all the dashboards, Google Ads, Meta, whatever. They should see that in their backend. They should see that revenue and profits are going up. But with lead gen, maybe there's longer sales cycles and whatnot, and because of that, it might take a little longer. But there are indicators of whether or not something is getting better, and those indicators are often not defined throughout the business. So you need to define those, and then everyone can look at that, have a universal source of truth, and that can help you tell the story of how things are getting better or worse, and then you can go from there and make things better.
Clean data is everything in lead gen, honestly. Even in the ad accounts, it's everything. So the first step was kind of defining what the hell we were doing, right? What's the process? Like, what's the flow of how does a funnel flow, right? So we had an ad, we got a call, then we had a qualified call, someone answered the call, someone booked it, they kept the appointment, they completed the job and revenue. Like, so the main process, like if we were to really break it down, and we have a bunch of videos on this process, so it's like call to qualified call to book the job to close job to the revenue, right? So that was the loop that we needed to figure out. So once we had that one system in place, okay, this is our funnel. It came down to defining what we were aiming for. Obviously, it was a qualified lead, right? So that's what we basically started optimizing towards in this case. Like we defined a qualified lead, and the way we define a qualified lead, and I think this is actually a huge nugget for people in lead gen space, is everybody defines a qualified lead for a phone call around 60 seconds. And I think that's so wrong, because I can pick up the phone and talk to you for 60 seconds and you won't even notice it. And we'll talk about random hello highs and we'll call it a day. So I got the sales team to basically go into their numbers and be like, okay, tell me how long it takes for you to book a call. And they were like 7-8 minutes. And I'm like, okay, how long does it take for you to know that it's like, okay, this is a viable lead? And they're like, anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes, right, of talking to them. We're like, okay, this one we can book, this one we can't, right? So the biggest thing I did immediately right after the bat was started messing with the time duration that I was defining as a qualified lead. So there's two cases. There's two ways this worked out, and I'm gonna give all you guys all the sauce. Is that how they say it? How the hip kids say it? So Colby, give you all the sauce.
Yeah, that's what all the kids are saying, for sure.
Anyway, so the first thing I did was I tracked imported calls and booked jobs, right? So now I had my book jobs inside the account and I had calls inside the account. So there are calls and book jobs, and there was a ratio between calls and book jobs. So I started increasing the duration from that I was tracking as a call inside of Google Ads, especially in the extension. So we went from like 60 to 120 to 150 to 180 to 200, blah, blah. Eventually, depending on the location, I found a threshold from where it went from calls to booked jobs. That like the number was from like 10 to 8. And I set that as my time threshold for that location. So now when I was optimizing, and let's just say it was 150 seconds. So now when I was optimizing for these calls, I was only optimizing for calls longer than 150 seconds. That was leading to booked jobs. Obviously, that meant less conversions overall, but at least I was optimizing for better. And there's a way around it, but
Quality
video. So that was one of the biggest fixes we did. And then we just did a regular campaign structure, which I don't think we're going to do in there. Anything you want to add here, Cole, before I jump to the comparison slide?
No, just quality is everything. Volume might not matter in the beginning of the funnel because you might just be attracting spam in the first place.
Yep. So again, calling out, like the biggest thing we changed was we changed the conversion action there and started optimizing a little differently. And here's basically what happened. Like these are direct KPIs pulled comparing 10 weeks before and 10 weeks after. And obviously, like the later half of the 10 weeks that were optimized, they were sitting at like a 6-7x. So before we took over, they were sitting at a 3.83. Kind of see. Oh, can you see my mouse, Colby? Yeah. So we spent 402 and then 390. So we spent 3% less, got them almost 20% more revenue. The ROI increased 23%. The leads they got increased by 40%. The amount of bookings they got increased by 33%. The cost per lead dropped by 29%. The cost per booking dropped by 27%. And this one doesn't directly correlate to us, but it was like, it's just there, I guess. So cancellation dropped by 2.59%. So just one simple change when you're optimizing for the right thing makes a huge difference. Obviously, it's a little bit more complex than that, but these are immediate numbers. Cool. Kind of looking at what was going on before and after. Look how cool that graph is. Oh my God, I didn't even see this. Anyways, so you can see where we took over and how it started uplifting over that time period versus what was going on before. And it's like a constant trend in like increased in revenue. Same thing here, where you're looking at cost per lead and cost per booking, that it's starting to fall off into the year and it's staying steady. Obviously, it's going to fluctuate also. Don't be thrown off by the fluctuations. They're going to fluctuate. Some weeks are worse, some weeks are bad. You're looking at general trends overall, like 3-4 week cycles. But you can see how like immediately things started coming down, which is great. And then here, this doesn't really emphasize, this was the sales teams actually, but this is, okay, the other thing about lead gen is like your sales teams need to be top tier. I can only do so much. So again, we pushed them to push their sales teams and they did. they got their revenue per booking up, which is basically revenue per job up, and they improved their cancellation rates by a little bit, which is amazing. Going back here, this doesn't really matter. The revenue per booking just dropped by 10%, but with the amount of volume increase, that's not even that big of a deal. Revenue still grew 20% overall. To kind of summarize everything we talked about today is that, Colby, we had a saying in the last video we did, garbage in equals garbage out, good stuff in equals good stuff out, basically, when you're talking about any ad platform. Like if you're going to feed it garbage, like a bad lead, what bad way to define lead, it's going to lead to bad outputs, right? But if you define a good lead, it's going to lead to good outputs. It's going to optimize better. If you define bad, it's going to optimize worse, basically, right? Have a single source of truth. Don't be dependent on Google Ads alone, and don't leave them dependent on their dashboards, right? Have a single source of truth that you're watching and you can monitor and optimize towards. Now, when you're running 14 locations, you needed a simplified campaign structure so you can actually track things properly. And I had 2 campaigns running, and I'm spending, I think it's like 300 to 500K a week. It just depends on the week and the ROI, stuff like that. And fix the problems that are in marketing. Fix your tracking, check your tags, that kind of stuff. And that's it. Thank you for coming to our TED Talk.
Oh, that's quick. Here, what do I got to add to this? I was just going to say, lead gen tracking is like the absolute most important piece. You need to get your tracking working. You need to make sure that everything's defined properly within Google Ads. You need to make sure you have a universal source of truth, and you need to look through that funnel and focus on what's ultimately going to make you more revenue. Don't get too lost in things like, oh, my cost per lead's too expensive, because maybe a more expensive cost per lead will give you a higher rate of qualified leads.
Yeah, I'm going to add on that. I'm going to add. I'm sorry, I won't. God damn, Colby.
No, go do it.
Go ahead. I'm still going to add on.
Go ahead and make my day.
Yeah, the interesting thing about what Colby said, and this is true, and I forgot to mention this too, is like the cost per lead is going to vary per location, right? But your job value is also going to vary per location. So a place that's, let's just say where Colby lives in a different part of Toronto, the average ticket value is 500. And I'm looking for a 5X. I need to be at 100 per booked job, right, to get my 5X. So I need to focus on that, because the average job type, or let's just say people don't pay that much to get something done in their house there, right? That's just the average value for the job. But in my city, where it's like, let's just say it's a larger city, more competition, or blah, blah, the average ticket is $1,000. I now have leeway to spend up to $200 to acquire that job, right? So you got to be careful with the individual KPIs as well for your businesses. That is all. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
All right. So go out there and change the world.